Thank you very much for the kind introduction and indeed for the invitation to provide the opening address for this conference. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt McCann. I was born with cerebral palsy, which means I essentially use this walking frame to attempt to get around, whether it's trying to get around just the local town that I live in or traveling. Just really for me, what I want to talk about to you today is about my own lived experience around accessibility and the lack of information that I've been finding as I've been growing up around information about sort of buildings, cities, towns, or countries and how accessible they are for people with disabilities, but also a bit more about my professional background and how I try to use technology to bridge that information gap. So for me, growing up with cerebral palsy in Ireland, there was a few issues from my perspective, right? I think even just something simple for my parents to know what school would I go to that was accessible for me. Because locally where I grew up in Kildare, there were no schools that actually had ramps at the time in the early 90s. So I was left to go up the steps and trying to struggle into the classrooms. And it was just even at that early age, I was realizing that, the built environment essentially wasn't built for people with disabilities in mind. In fact, I've come to realize that the default setting these days still is being built for mid-20s right-handed non-disabled males as the default viewpoint. And that's not the majority of the world's population. So really, where I started to go from there was as I got into secondary school, I got more comfortable with being able to advocate for my own needs. And with that, I knew that I had to explain ahead of time that, I'm going to need ramps to get into the school. I'm going to need extra time to get around the school. I'm going to need, extra supports. And the school took their time with that. It took 3 years to get the ramps in. And really, it was just, for me, it was not good enough to be able to not just advocate for myself, but I wanted to be able to find a way that I could let people know about these different barriers that exist, but also about the good places that are around. There are too often what I've found within the accessibility space, barriers make the news more than what's being done positively. And what that means is that, to my perspective, businesses tend to forget about the positive things they're doing around accessibility, and then will choose to just not speak about it. So that was really, that experiences in school and growing up kind of brought me into university and realizing that, again, while I was getting to make friends, people, were trying to make events and trying to, have fun in college, and realizing that, a lot of these events that were kind of designed by the college weren't thought of from an accessibility or disability first perspective. They were all thought of from that original perspective, mid-20s students. But for me, I thought, look, while I'm doing software engineering, I thought there must be something I can do to help, bridge this gap and sort of change people's mindsets. So I built out the first version of an app, which is the name of my company at the same time as well, called Acess Earth. With the idea being initially that anyone could rate, whether it be hotels, coffee shops, restaurants, transport hubs, by how accessible it was from their perspective. Because I know that for me with cerebral palsy, there's about 150 million people in the world with cerebral palsy. Every one of those needs are different, just as every one of your needs are different within this room. Everyone's had a different experience with disability and with accessibility. And so to my mind, when I wanted to build something to help, I wanted to make sure that this was built in such a way that, one, anyone could find information that was best suited for them, but also when looking to help the businesses, to help bridge that gap, to show what they need to do to improve, but also about what they're doing well. And so really, that's kind of the key thing for me moving forward with the business, was how can I both help to bridge that information gap that I've been talking about, but also about how can I help businesses to become more accessible? And indeed, how can I begin to help towns and cities and then live up to the name of the business, the world, more accessible? So from that kind of competition that I entered into in university to build that first version of the app, it was for the Microsoft Imagine Cup. And that led me to then say, okay, well, look, this is something that is useful not just for me, but for anyone with sort of disability or accessibility needs. Because when I was doing that, more of that research around this first version, I came to realize that, there's over 1 billion people in the world with some form of accessibility need. And, the majority of those people with disabilities aren't being served. They're not in an environment that's sort of built for them. So what I wanted to make sure was that no one was left behind in that conversation, in that information that I've been collecting. So I began to work with as many sort of advocacy groups, whether it was locally or internationally, to kind of get their experiences about what it was like living in their particular country and what the role was, with the government and what supports they were getting or not, and then also with the local businesses too. What were they doing to help make themselves more known if they were accessible, but also what improvements they could make to be accessible as well. And so that meant that, during that time in college, I got to speak to people across all the continents, well, except for Antarctica, I suppose. I need to still get that. But getting to speak to people in, Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, and Europe, just to hear from them about all those different needs and what different types of accessibility needs or disabilities they had, to make sure that I was in some way being able to collect as much information to be able to bring that back, not just to the individual, but also to the businesses that I work with, and then also to the local councils. Because to me, there's multiple different stakeholders at play when you have this information. It's one challenge to get the information and to let the group and users and people with disabilities know that it's there. It's an entirely different challenge to help to advocate for that change on a more wider policy level, more kind of practical kind of government level as well. So I wanted to be able to then sort of help to see how can I bridge that kind of challenge. And so I went back to the university, in this case it was Maynooth, explained to them what I was doing. They learned what I was doing with the competitions over the years. And it was through Maynooth that I got to work with them and 36 partners across Europe on a research project called Smart and Healthy Aging. So the concept of that particular project was to look at, as we all age and get older, that our needs change, and how can we use technology to sort of bridge that gap so that we're living at home for longer, living within our communities for longer. It was this concept at the time that was called social prescribing. So I was looking at it that as you get new accessibility needs, or accessibility needs change over time, it's about making sure that there's that holistic viewpoint, that the information is there, not just about, how to make your home more accessible, but how to make your community more accessible as well. So through that project, I was able to then improve that system and also get access to talking to local councils, both in Ireland and across Europe, on what they need to do to actually listen to the needs of people with disabilities. And I think that that's something that's incredibly important about an organization like PSI, to be able to have that voice for the community. But also, really, for me, it's about making sure that it happens locally too, at local access groups, whether that's in Selbridge or Kilkenny or anywhere across Ireland, making sure that those councils know what they need to do to improve. And I think that's what's incredibly important, because without knowing what they need to do to improve, there's nothing that's going to really be done. And I wanted to then, I guess the next piece of the puzzle for me was, okay, got the information piece, got the voice of the councils, then how can you further affect change? Well, for me, was then looking at how could I look at the international standards, and how could I look to try and improve those over time as well. So from the project that I did with Maynooth, I also then started to work on a new international standard for multi-generational neighborhoods. And the idea behind that, again, is to look at, very similar to what I did on the Smart and Healthy Aging project, but looking at how can we build neighborhoods and environments that we don't age out of, that our accessibility needs don't mean that we have to move somewhere else because it's not suitable for them and for you. And really, for me, that's kind of the key thing, right? Is to try and bridge what we're doing with gathering the information, informing the local councils, and then also affecting the international standards. And all of that is kind of being underpinned by my own background within technology and looking at how can I also bring the private sector along that journey too. So getting to, I've got to work with the likes of Microsoft and with Google over the years to make sure that more information is put into Google Maps or into the different search engines about local businesses' accessibility. Because I've lost track, to be honest, of the amount of times I've traveled somewhere new and I've booked a hotel that say, yes, we're accessible. And I get there and there's like 3 steps up to the entrance and they say to me, oh, well, our rooms are on the ground floor, so they must be accessible, right? I was like, no. So it's just kind of helping to, through these multiple different channels, different things, is to try and make sure that people know more about accessibility, that it's not just thought about from one viewpoint, that it's thought about from a more holistic, kind of universal design led approach. And that kind of was really where I kind of formed my own business today, is very much through that universal design lens, because in the end, really that whole concept of designing for everyone benefits everyone. And when I get asked to work on new builds or renovations, the first thing I ask is, well, do you have the voice of your users at the table? Do you speak to your employees or to your customers and those with disabilities or accessibility needs to make sure that at that design process they are consulted and listened to? And I think that that's going to be one of the key roles kind of moving forward with this, because we want to be able to make sure that when we work with the private sector, that any learnings we take from that project, we can then apply to the next project as well, to the next town, to the next village, to the next city, so that we're taking the best practices, whether it be from Singapore, whether it be from Japan, or from across Europe or America, to make sure that, we can bring the best of what there is to Ireland and to help to improve what we have currently. And I think that really one of the main ways that we can do that is by through that advocacy piece. Because at the end of June this year, with the European Accessibility Act coming into force, now there's really a lot more of a impetus for businesses to make, for one thing, not just digital services more accessible, but also physical infrastructure more accessible too. Now, Ireland has chosen not to do the optional proviso for the physical infrastructure just yet, but I think that means that it's just a matter of time to follow the rest of Europe in making sure that Ireland can learn to lead with accessibility rather than just following, which is what it has been doing for a number of years. And I think really kind of advents like policies like the UN CRPD as well means that Ireland now is slowly getting these sets of standards that means that we can improve the situation. But I think that is only really going to happen if organizations like the PSI, like you individually, can advocate for your needs, whether it be just to your friends and family, so when you're going somewhere new, they know what to look out for, or to your local council or to your local government representative to say, look, what we have right now is not good enough, but it can be better. And here are some examples of what has happened in other countries, in other towns, and other villages. And really, that's kind of what I wanted to set out to do to begin with Acess Earth, because I know that it's going to take time to make these improvements, to make these changes. But for me, having access to that information initially, all the way back when I was trying to book a hotel, and if it means that we can then eventually look to affect changes on what the future neighborhoods, future towns and cities look like, well, then that's kind of part of why I set up Acess Earth to begin with. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I look forward to hearing about all the great other things going on in the conference. And yeah, thank you very much.
Before you finish up there might be some questions. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sure a lot of people might start Googling your website and hope there's a list of hotels that are fully accessible and restaurants. And
it's smaller than you think.
Is there any questions there from anybody? Don't be shy. Is there a mic?
Nearly good afternoon now. John Dole. When I was listening to Matt, I thought your talk was very engaging, very practical, very hopeful, and still the challenges. I was a bit bothered when I heard about the 3 years to put in a ramp, and I'm going, wow, how long would it take them to build a children's hospital? So maybe we're doing a little bit better on that. It's only taken a decade and a half or something. But the serious thing and a lovely thing, I'm looking at you and I'm looking at the title up there, the Joan Bradley keynote address. And one thing that struck me was I said, you know, if Joan was here, well, you wouldn't be here given the Joan Bradley keynote address. But apart from that, she'd be sitting around here somewhere and she'd be the first with the hand up with a question and a bit of a comment. But I think what she'd do then, which I noted in my own life with her, during the tea break or at lunchtime, she'd sidle up to you and she'd be as interested in you, Matt, as if she was your aunt, a friend, or whatever. So I think you've done her a great justice today, and I really enjoyed your address. Thank you very much.
Susan Dowling. Hi, Matt. I'm sure you're aware that every local authority in Ireland has to have an access officer. That is not defined anywhere as to how many hours, what their job description is, and tends to be tacked on to another role in a local authority. Yep. And some access officers are very engaged and others really are not. I'm just wondering what your experience is of any contact with them and how you feel that might be improved.
Yes, and I fully agree, and that's the reality is a lot of times they're tacked on to the health and safety officer or to some other title that takes up 90% of their time. But really, kind of a model that I've seen, I've spoken to, I think probably about 10 or 12 access officers across the country. And I think one of the best models that I've seen is actually in Kildare, where the access officer, Michael Hurley, has decided to, sort of bring the local access groups together under one network so that they work together, the 4 towns that are in this umbrella, work together to know that they actually have similar challenges and similar needs. So it means that they're able to go to the council directly or to the city engineer or the county engineer to say, look, if you can cover these 4 challenges, you actually solve multiple problems across multiple different towns within the county. And I think that that's kind of a key thing, that we want to make sure that there is kind of a collaborative approach with local access groups. And I think the majority of barriers that are seen locally are repeated throughout the county. And I think that that's one of the things that we could be doing more with the access officers is to, Michael Hurley did this to make his job easier, right? That's the only reason he did that. But it had the multiplying effect of then actually giving more data and more information to the council and to the county about the challenges and the similarities that are happening across the county.
Thanks, Matt.
Make sure we can hear.
John Dempsey. Matt, is that Acess Earth? And is that a website or is that an app that you have?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, it's both. So it's the website. What is more geared towards kind of helping businesses and what
Right.
they can do in terms of making themselves more accessible,
Yeah.
while the app is for sort of everyone else, right? To find out, and they can rate places by their own experience.
Yeah.
But also, we're using the app with the businesses and the corporates that we work with to make them more aware of how accessible their local communities are. And it's something that I'd love to do with PSI moving forward as well, is a similar kind of event. Because I think that from my perspective, whenever I've done these, people who don't have any experience of accessibility or disability begin to realize, oh, I go to this coffee shop all the time. I didn't realize there were 3 steps down to it, or that the lighting is poor. So what I want to do with the app and the website is to kind of combine the two, I suppose, to make sure that that information is being actioned as well.
And so that's the name of the app, and we can get
Yes.
it on Google Play or any of
You
those.
can get it on Google Play, you can
Okay,
get it on
right.
iOS or Apple as well.
Yeah. One of the experiences that I've had over the years is in going into one of the old hotels and to say, oh, we have a preservation order here, we don't have to do anything in I'm sure you've experienced that, have you?
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
that's what got me to yell at Fáilte Ireland to try and, make sure that there are, accommodations that can be made, or at least at the very need that that information is let known up front. Because again, too often businesses are more scared of saying what they don't have.
Right.
And really, I think it's about that freedom of information and choice, because you should know ahead of time, all right, this hotel isn't going to be suitable for me.
Okay.
And I think that that's kind of what, I would love every place to be accessible, but that's going to take time and it's going to take energy. And I think one of the ways to do that is to, show more business to the hotels that are accessible. And then they'll realize, actually, that's a positive from a marketing perspective. So again, I'm very kind of optimistic in my views, but I think that one of the ways to do that is through competition and give your money and your time to hotels that are going to cater your needs.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Anybody else or any experiences you want to share? Yeah.
Hello, Matt. Tommy Watkins here. Matt, I think it's a brilliant idea. I'm with another group and we are planning a holiday in March, and they've set up an app. And there's lots of information coming into us to update us, keep us informed, I was just thinking that, would you be considering rating various buildings, etc., on your app, that we could see, what's the best choice? Thank you.
So I had gone through that, do we do a rating system? Do we do a 5-star system? But where I kept going back to was, my 5 stars is different to somebody else's 5 stars. And there are some things like, parking. What does 3-star parking mean? So what I landed on was essentially to tag businesses by what they have. So whether they have a step-free entrance, whether they have wide doors, whether they have accessible hotel rooms, a little bit about what that means, roll-in shower, etc. So it's about giving a list for businesses to know what they have and what they don't have. And then within the app, you can determine what your own access needs are. So then the businesses that contribute to all of your access needs can then be highlighted on the map. And then the other piece around it too is when you then rate somewhere and somebody else comes in to check the hotel that has similar needs to you, it can be shown that it's like someone else has rated this with a similar experience and they've said has been positive. So that's kind of the approach I've taken. But I agree, like a 5-star system is usually what we would see and what we would expect. But I think that accessibility and disability has so many nuances and so many individual needs that it's something that needs to be very individual and needs to be very kind of bespoke. At least that's been my approach with it.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Hello, Matt. Geraldine O'Kane. You mentioned when you were studying in Maynooth, you were involved in some sort of a project where it was smarter way of living as you age.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a smarter way of living as you age? And you got some information on that. Is that also on the app?
That is, so I have a link, I'll put a link to that on the website as well, but the project was called Shapes. So if you look that up with Maynooth, there's a separate website for that too, about the different technologies that were trialed across Europe as well. But I can definitely provide the links to that and the different other projects that I mentioned over time too, for sure.
Right. And could we ever get a sample of that? Because a lot of us wouldn't be as good at technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide more information, whether it be through like a document or a printout. I can do that as well. Absolutely.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Last two.
Hello, Mick Egan. I just want to remind people that this coming Friday is Make Way Day. And the idea of Make Way Day is to give people who don't have a disability, wherever else, things they do on a daily living impedes other people with disability and whatnot. So it's very important that day is, kept in mind. And one other thing is I just want to bring, especially in Dublin, we have got these now bus islands and whatnot. And the really nasty one, I just want to bring it to your attention, is what's known as floating bus stops. They're reducing the footpath to allow cyclists to continue when a bus pulls in to go through. Yeah. And I asked the question, why can't the cyclist wait behind the bus, like drivers in cars, for the bus to unload and move on? Oh, we don't want the cyclist sitting waiting. So what they're doing is they're giving a free ride to just keep taking through. So that's very important that we understand. Wherever about the bus islands, they're big enough. The floating bus islands are really, really dangerous.
They are 100%. And that's one of the things that I'm working with the Centre for Universal Design and the NDA on. I think it was the designer of that was a UK architect. And I think he's since gone on record to say that model was a mistake.
Exactly.
So it's.
When I was at a meeting there earlier this month, where let's turn around and say, I've never said it at a meeting, but I said that was a stupid idea to go ahead with that. And that's when it came back. Oh, we don't want the cyclists waiting a couple of seconds to help us know. So it's very important that we do something on that one.
It is, and I think one of the ways to do that is think about health and safety, right? We looked at something in Maynooth where it was slips, trips, and falls in a certain part of the pavement, and the only way to get around that was to say, actually, you'll get less insurance claims if you change it.
My thing was, as I said to your man, I said, listen, I hope you got good insurance because you're going to need it.
100%.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt.
Hey.
Yomi, that's my name.
Nice to meet you.
Just wondering if you would find this useful. That is to interest the Department of Justice in this project, this app, especially. From a study I conducted, I realized that one of the claims the Department of Justice usually make about people who come into this country from other places, especially to seek asylum, is that they are unaware of their needs, especially people who have special needs. That so they just put them anywhere they like, especially hotels with no access, and some other places like that. So let's make it difficult for them to keep hiding by telling them that, look, we have an app and you can in fact check and see that this place is suitable and people who have come into this country to seek protection can in fact be protected fully by being located in these kind of places.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think the fact that that doesn't happen is ridiculous.
So we'll wrap up then. I don't think there's any more questions. We'll let you off the hook now.
Thanks so much.
We pushed you to the edge.